Today, I'd like to continue our discussion of the book Undoing the Knots by Maureen O'Connell, a book about the Philadelphia area. Maureen grew up there and other parts in Pennsylvania. And the idea of confronting and unpacking a little bit of the history of the area, a little bit of Maureen's own personal family history to really undo this knot that we call racism. And I guess you have to say it's a knot that we all cope with in some way. People throw that term around a lot. Racist, you're racist. This is a racist remark. But really, to take a look at that seriously in ourselves and see in to what degree we are racist, either knowingly or for most of us, really, it's unknowingly that we adopt a racist attitude. And that certainly was the case with Maureen and her family. Some of the things that Maureen looks at in her book in terms of unpacking racism, she looks at the college percentage of black students and compares that percentage with the percentage of black students who would live in the area. When she does that, she finds that percentage is rather low in terms of the percentage of people that, for example, black people who of college age who would live in Philadelphia versus those who attend college. And why is that low? Is a question she unpacks a bit. Is that a sign of racism? Well, you look at it and you say, well, is it really a sign of racism, or is it that maybe these black students don't want to attend college, they want to take a different career path? But when you step back from that, you say, well, if we don't have a racist society, if all things in our society are pretty much equal, wouldn't it make sense that roughly the same number of students from every ethnic and racial group attended college? I mean, when you look at it, that would be the norm. You wouldn't even think twice. Well, okay, there's 25% of black people in that area, 25% are going to naturally attend college, or somewhere close to that. The fact that it's not happening, say, well, what's up here? What's the deal? What would be some of the causes? What are the reasons why that's not happening? And that's what we mean by unpacking racism. It's not to make people feel guilty or to accuse people. It's to take a look at a problem, to analyze that problem, and to say, well, what are some of the contributing factors to that? And then how can we work to achieve perhaps better results in that area? Would be the approach. Another thing that Maureen looks at is health issues, such as rates of infant mortality, rates of cancer, lower life expectancy. Why is there a lower life expectancy in the black community versus the white community? You might say, could be all sorts of reasons. You could offer, well, gee, black people don't take care of themselves as well as white people. You might even say, well, that's it. That's the reason. Maybe they smoke more. Maybe they drink more. Well. But then you take a step back and you say, wait a minute here. There's something unusual about this. There's a certain number of white people who live in an area, or a certain number of black people. Their life expectancy should be roughly the same, shouldn't it? Shouldn't their infant mortality rates be roughly the same? It kind of makes sense. Their rates of cancer, I mean, they're exposed to the same elements as white people. They live in the same community. Why wouldn't they be the same? So again, it's just statistics like that raise questions in our mind. And part of unpacking racism is to look for some answers to those questions and say, well, what are some of the possible reasons for that? Another thing that Maureen unpacks is the COVID-19 rates. Why were those rates higher in the minority populations than in the white populations? he would say, well, part of the factor was housing, jobs. They couldn't isolate as much. Maybe their jobs weren't as good where they could stay home. Maybe they didn't have internet access at home, all these other factors. But then you look back and say, well, wait a minute, COVID-19 is an illness. It's a illness that spreads in the population from one to the other. I mean, it should be roughly the same, shouldn't it, in all elements of a population. It shouldn't target one group disproportionately to another group, should it? I mean, that says something about maybe our healthcare system, maybe our living conditions. Something's amiss there. So again, we unpack that a little bit. Say, well, why is that happening? Why is that amiss there? Incarceration rates. We look at the incarceration rates and we say, well, gee, it's so much higher for black people than white people. Why is that? Some people say, well, it can be related to poverty. There are higher rates of poverty in the black population. But then we say, well, wait a minute now. If it's related to poverty, and there is, of course, correlations between crime and poverty, why are there higher poverty rates? Something's wrong here. This should not be happening. It should be roughly equal, shouldn't it, in all aspects of the population? Why should a certain group in the population, a certain racial group, just because of the color of their skin, should they be incarcerated at a higher rate? I mean, this is something that is jarring. We say, well, there's got to be something amiss there in terms of racism. Let's unpack that a little bit. Let's go a little bit further. Let's ask, well, why is this happening? What are some factors, and how can we reduce that and make for a society that is more equal in every respect? Some people relate it to the idea that, well, if I am white, I have a sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to a good job. I'm entitled to better housing. I'm entitled to better health care because, after all, I'm white. The predominant groups, by color in our society are white. They're more white than black, more white than brown. So, shouldn't whites be entitled to, say, a higher standard of living? Shouldn't whites be entitled to better jobs because they are white and they are the majority in the population? And we want to make sure that that majority is kept, as the majority. And so we're entitled to a better job, a better home, because we're white, right? I mean, because we're the majority, and that's the way society works. The majority should have better opportunities than the minorities, right? I mean, does that make sense? And we're looking and say, well, I can see where you're coming from with that, but well, wait a minute, what about the idea of equality, equal opportunity for all? And if it seems like one group is doing better than another group just because they're the color of their skin, is this really what we want in our society? So in all these cases, what Maureen is doing is she's raising certain statistics and taking a look at them and asking questions based on those statistics. And again, it's not to create guilt in anyone, it's just to look at this idea of what is racism, because sometimes we throw that term racism around a lot. And Maureen is saying, well, wait a minute, let's take a deeper look, deeper dive, and unpack it a bit and ask the question why.